Okay, so let's dive into this lawsuit that Google's on the defensive about.
Yeah.
Okay, again, another Google lawsuit you might be thinking, but this one really gets into their whole digital ad empire,
Yeah, it's not just any lawsuit either, right? They just lost their attempt to have it dismissed. So it's going to trial.
which is a big deal.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah, and the stakes are really high. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars here.
Mhm.
And it's not like, some small side thing. This is about how Google allegedly rigged the game in their favor
Yeah.
with the whole, the digital ad market.
To give you an idea of how seriously they're taking it, Google founder Sergey Brin and CEO Sundar Pichai have been ordered to actually show up in court.
Yeah, that's pretty rare.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so this is a totally separate case from the antitrust case that just wrapped up.
right.
This one digs deep into the mechanics of how online ads work. Like, those auctions that happen every millisecond when you load a web page?
And it decides which ads you see.
Exactly.
Right.
If we zoom out a little bit, the plaintiffs are basically saying that Google used its control over the whole ad tech system to give itself, an unfair advantage.
Right. And they've been digging through expert reports, court filings. They've even looked at Google's code to try and prove their case.
Mm-hmm.
So to really get this, we need to understand the basics of how digital advertising works.
Mm.
You have the publishers, like websites that want to sell ad space. And
Right.
you have the advertisers who want to, get their message in front of customers,
Makes sense.
right? And connecting them are these things called ad servers and ad exchanges.
Right.
And those are the platforms that handle these super fast auctions for ad space that are happening, all the time.
Yeah, they're lightning fast.
Yeah, Google actually owns a big chunk of this whole infrastructure, including their ad server, DoubleClick for Publishers, or DFP,
Mm.
and their massive ad exchange called Ad Exchange or AdX.
Right. And that's where the allegations of anti-competitive behavior really start to come in. The plaintiffs are saying Google used its control over these platforms to basically stifle competition and maybe even harm advertisers and publishers.
Yeah.
So one of the most controversial things Google is accused of is this thing called Project Bernanke. It's an algorithm that supposedly used data from past bids to give Google's own ad buying tools an edge.
So it's like they're peeking at everybody else's cards before they place their own bet.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Right. So did this give Google an unfair advantage and hurt advertisers who were using other tools?
Well, one expert, Dr. David W. Doremus, who was hired by the plaintiffs, says that Project Bernanke gave Google's tools access to much more detailed information than third-party buyers had.
Wow. So it really was like having insider information.
It seems like it, yeah.
Right.
And the plaintiffs are saying this gave Google a huge leg up in those really fast auctions.
Right. Now, another tactic that's being looked at is reserve price optimization, or RPO. Now, this one sounds a little bit more technical, but it's basically about setting a minimum price, a floor, for ads in Google's ad exchange.
Right.
Now, on the surface, that might sound reasonable, right? You want to make sure that the publishers are getting a fair price.
Yeah, you would think so.
But the plaintiffs are saying that Google used RPO to manipulate these prices to squeeze out other bidders and let their own tools win at a cheaper cost.
Hmm.
And they're saying Google wasn't upfront about how they were setting these prices, which created a lack of fairness and could have hurt both sides, the publishers and the advertisers.
Yeah, and it's not like they're just making vague accusations here. They've got an expert witness who looked at millions of auctions that could have been impacted by this RPO, and they even dug into Google's code to back up their claim.
Wow.
Yeah.
Google, of course, denies any wrongdoing. They're saying that what they're doing is just part of running a complicated ad exchange and that it benefits everyone in the long run. But the plaintiffs are pushing back hard. They say that Google's actions have actually stifled competition and reduced the choices that publishers and advertisers have.
Right, and to make their case even stronger, they're also pointing to Google's history with antitrust issues.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying this isn't the first time Google has been accused of anti-competitive stuff.
Right. So they're trying to show a pattern of behavior here
Yeah.
to suggest that Google hasn't really learned its lesson and is still doing these kinds of things.
Exactly. They're saying that Google's past fines haven't been enough to actually make them stop, so they want stronger measures to actually curb their power.
Right. They're hoping the judge will consider all of Google's past actions when they decide on a penalty in this case.
Yeah, Google says that these past cases were different and they've already changed things to fix those issues.
Right. So they're trying to say that they're a different company now and they've learned from their mistakes.
Yeah, they're saying they're committed to following the rules now.
Right. But the plaintiffs are skeptical. They're saying Google's actions don't match their words.
Right.
They're hoping that the court will see through Google's claims and hold them accountable for their past behavior.
Exactly. This whole debate about Google's past is a really important part of this case. It could really influence how the court sees Google's intentions and how serious these violations might be.
Yeah, it raises a big question. Can a company really change its ways after years of doing things that are anti-competitive? That's something the court will have to think about very carefully.
Absolutely. And the plaintiffs are saying that what Google did actually hurt competition and limited choices for both advertisers and publishers.
Right, and they're demanding accountability, and they want potentially billions of dollars in penalties.
It's a really complex case with potentially huge consequences, not just for Google, but for the whole digital ad world.
Absolutely. But we need to go a bit deeper into another controversial practice that's a core part of this case. Is called dynamic revenue share, or DRS. This is all about how Google takes a cut of the ad revenue that's made through their ad exchange.
Right. So think of it like this: Google acts as this middleman connecting publishers and advertisers, and they take a percentage of that ad money for providing that service. But with DRS, this revenue share wasn't fixed. It could change.
Right.
The plaintiffs are saying that Google tweaked this system to favor its own ad buying tools and possibly even shortchanged publishers.
Right. So they were kind of playing both sides of the game.
Exactly. Now, it's important to know that there were actually two versions of DRS. There was DRS V1, which ran from 2016 to 2018, and then DRS V2, which was used from 2018 to 2019.
Right. And the plaintiffs are claiming that both versions were designed to benefit Google's own tools, even though they worked in slightly different ways. They're basically saying that all of this stuff combined with things like Project Bernanke and RPO created this system where Google was unfairly tipping the scales in their own favor.
Right. The digital ad market is really complicated and it's not very transparent. Those auctions happen so fast behind the scenes. It's not like comparing prices for a new car or something.
Right. And Google has said that all these practices are just ways to make their ad exchange better and more efficient.
Yeah, right.
But the plaintiffs are saying that no, what Google did has actually made competition worse. And it's limited the choices for advertisers and publishers.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they're saying that it has distorted the entire digital ad market.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. To really understand how this all works, we kind of have to get into the nitty-gritty details of those auctions, those milliseconds, that happen behind the scenes.
Yeah, right. And Google has argued that everything they've done is just part of, trying to make the system work better. They're saying that it actually helps everyone.
Yeah.
But the plaintiffs are saying, no, that's not true. What you're doing is stifling competition, you're limiting the choices for advertisers and publishers, and you're actually distorting the market, right? And they want Google to be held accountable, and they're asking for potentially billions of dollars in penalties.
Yeah.
Now, to bolster their case, they're also focusing on what Google has said publicly about creating an equal footing in their ad exchange.
Right?
Google has said that all bidders compete on a level playing field. But the plaintiffs are calling that misleading, especially when you consider things like Project Bernanke and DRS, which they say gave Google a secret advantage. They're suggesting that all that talk about fairness and transparency from Google was really just a cover-up for practices that were designed to tilt the playing field in their favor.
Right. And they're using internal Google documents as evidence to show that the company knew they weren't treating all bidders equally.
Right.
Of course, Google says these allegations are false. They say they were genuine when they talked about equal footing and that they didn't mean to mislead anyone.
Right.
But the plaintiffs aren't buying it. They say that Google's dominance gives them the power to operate without being transparent and accountable.
This issue of equal footing is really important. It gets to the heart of whether Google was playing fair or using their power to mess up the market. And it can have a huge impact on how they're allowed to run their ad exchange in the future. This case goes beyond Google. It's a fight about the future of digital advertising. This case could completely change how online ads are bought and sold, and it could redefine Google's power in this incredibly important market.
Yeah, it really boils down to this. Did Google go from just being a smart business to being an illegal monopoly? That's what the court's going to have to figure out.
Right, and that's why everyone is watching this case so closely.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Absolutely.
This case could reshape the whole digital ad industry. The plaintiffs are arguing that if Google keeps doing what they're accused of, it'll stifle innovation and limit competition, and that's ultimately going to hurt both publishers and advertisers.
They're hoping for a future where Google's power is checked. more companies can compete fairly and there's more transparency in the ad market, they think that would create a more vibrant and diverse ecosystem which would benefit everyone.
Right. Google, on the other hand, is painting a different picture.
Ah.
They're saying that the current system is efficient, it delivers relevant ads, and it helps publishers make money from their content.
So they're basically saying, look, we're the best at what we do, and if you mess with things, it could actually harm the entire industry.
Yeah. This whole debate about the future of digital advertising is a really interesting and important part of this case. It brings up some fundamental questions about the role of tech giants and the balance of power between those companies and regulators.
And it's a conversation that's only going to get more intense as technology keeps evolving and the digital ad market keeps growing.
Right.
To really grasp the scale of this case, we need to think about Google's overall reach. It's not just an advertising company. It's a tech giant with a presence in almost every aspect of our digital lives.
Right. They dominate search, email, video sharing, mobile operating systems, maps, and so much more. Their control over digital advertising is just one piece of this massive empire.
The plaintiffs are arguing that Google has basically used its power in areas like search to give itself an unfair advantage in other markets, like digital ads. For example, they point to accusations that Google prioritizes its own products in search results, which could be steering traffic away from competitors. They're saying that Google is using its power across its whole ecosystem to stay on top, and that's stifling competition and limiting what consumers can choose from.
Yeah, Google denies these allegations, of course.
Right.
They say that their success is all about innovation and giving users the best experience.
Right. They're saying that they operate fairly and ethically and that their actions actually help consumers.
Right.
But the plaintiffs are not convinced. They're arguing that Google's size and power have become a threat to a fair and competitive market. They're calling for regulators to step in and break up Google's alleged monopoly. They're saying this is crucial for protecting innovation and ensuring a level playing field.
Right. This case is actually part of a bigger movement to control the power of these tech giants like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple.
Right. Governments around the world are trying to figure out how to regulate these companies without stopping innovation. This case is like a major battle in that larger war.
Yeah, and the outcome could have a huge impact on how these tech titans operate in the future. One particularly complex allegation involves the claim that Google shared user data between its different products.
Right.
This gets to the heart of those concerns about data privacy and how tech companies use our personal information.
The plaintiffs allege that Google took data that they collected from users in one area, like their search history, and used it to make their ad buying tools better at targeting. They're arguing that this gave Google's tools a big advantage over third-party tools that didn't have access to all that user data.
Yeah, they're saying Google was blurring the lines between its different products using information collected for one purpose to gain an advantage in another.
Google insists that they've always been transparent about their data practices and that users have control over how their information is used.
Right.
They're saying they've taken steps to protect user privacy and that any data sharing they did was legal. But the plaintiffs counter that Google's explanations about data sharing were often hidden in those long, complicated privacy policies that nobody really reads.
Right, so they're saying that Google made it hard for users to understand how their data was being used.
Yeah, and that they were basically tricked into giving Google permission to share their information.
This whole debate over data sharing is a really sensitive one. It brings up questions about the balance between personalization and privacy in our digital world.
Right, and it's an issue that's only going to become more important as tech companies collect more and more data about what we do online. To really understand the impact of this case, we need to hear from the people who are directly affected, the publishers and the advertisers.
Exactly. Publishers are worried that Google's actions have squeezed their profits, making it hard for them to stay in business.
Right. Some publishers feel like they're trapped. They have to use Google's ad platform even if they're not getting a good deal because it's become so powerful. They're concerned that Google's control over the ad market limits their ability to negotiate fair prices and find other ways to make money.
On the advertiser side, there are concerns that Google's practices have driven up advertising costs, making it harder for them to reach the right audience.
Some advertisers are saying that Google's auction system is like a black box. They don't understand how bids are used and whether they're getting a good return on their investment.
Right. They're worried that Google's dominance is stifling innovation and limiting their access to newer and more effective advertising technologies.
Both publishers and advertisers are really watching this case closely. They're hoping for a ruling that creates a more fair and competitive ad market, but they're also nervous about how it might disrupt their businesses.
Right. Their anxieties show that this case isn't just about legal arguments. It's about real people whose livelihoods are on the line.
Yeah, it really shows the power that Google has in the digital economy.
Mm.
Now let's shift our focus to the courtroom itself and the key players in this legal drama. We have the plaintiffs, a group of states and businesses who are accusing Google of anti-competitive behavior.
Right. And they're represented by a team of really good lawyers who are determined to prove that Google broke the law and hurt competition.
Right. They've spent years building their case, gathering evidence, and coming up with legal strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going up against one of the most powerful corporations in the world with tons of legal resources.
Yeah, on the other side, we have Google, the tech giant, fighting to protect its reputation and its way of doing business.
Right. And they've put together a top-notch legal team known for their aggressive tactics.
Mm-hmm. They're arguing that everything Google has done is perfectly legal and that the plaintiffs' claims are baseless.
This legal battle is a clash of titans with both sides bringing their best. And the outcome could have huge consequences not just for Google, but for the whole tech industry.
Right. Let's take a look at some of the specific arguments being made. The plaintiffs are alleging that Google engaged in a pattern of anti-competitive behavior to protect its dominant position in the digital ad market.
Mm-hmm.
They're pointing to things like Project Bernanke RPO and DRS as evidence that Google was unfairly manipulating the auction system to benefit itself.
Right.
They're arguing that these practices have stopped competition, made prices higher for advertisers, and decreased revenues for publishers.
They're claiming that Google has used its power to create a system where it's almost impossible for other companies to compete.
Right. Google, of course, is pushing back hard. They say their practices are just part of running a complex and efficient ad exchange.
Right. They're claiming that their actions have actually helped the entire market by delivering relevant ads and helping publishers make money from their content.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying the plaintiffs are misinterpreting the evidence and that they haven't done anything wrong.
Right. This back and forth between the two sides is a really interesting example of legal strategy. Each side is trying to present the facts in a way that supports their case.
Right. And the judge will have to weigh all this information carefully before making a decision.
Yeah. Speaking of the judge, let's think about their role in all of this. The judge is the one who makes the final decision, the one who will decide if Google is liable for breaking antitrust laws.
Right. They'll be listening to both sides, reviewing the evidence, and considering all the legal arguments.
Mm-hmm. The judge will ask tough questions, challenge assumptions, and try to get things clarified.
They're responsible for making sure the trial is fair and impartial while keeping things moving along.
Right. The judge's role is crucial. Their decisions will have a big impact on the outcome of the case.
And their rulings will set a precedent for future antitrust cases, which could shape how tech giants are regulated for years to come.
Mm.
Now, adding another layer of complexity here is the possibility of a settlement.
Yeah, it's not unusual for big lawsuits like this to be settled outside of court through a negotiated agreement.
Right, both sides have reasons to settle.
Mm.
Google could avoid a long and costly trial and the risk of a bad ruling that could hurt their reputation and force them to change how they do business.
Right.
For the plaintiffs, a settlement would mean a quicker resolution and a guaranteed payout instead of all the uncertainty of a trial.
But reaching a settlement is tricky.
Right.
Both sides want the best deal possible. So they'll be negotiating the terms, including the financial penalties, any changes to Google's practices, and the level of oversight going forward.
Mm-hmm. And there's always the chance that the negotiations could fail and the case would go back to court.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance with both sides weighing the pros and cons of settling versus going to trial. Let's step outside the courtroom for a moment and think about the broader implications for the whole tech industry. This lawsuit is part of a growing wave of antitrust scrutiny targeting tech giants like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple.
Right. Governments and regulators around the world are getting more and more concerned about the power these companies have, their impact on competition, and how they're using data.
This case could set a precedent for how these companies are regulated going forward. It could lead to stricter antitrust enforcement and tighter rules for their business practices.
The tech industry is watching very closely. They want to see how the court rules and what it means for their own businesses. The outcome of this case could signal a shift in power between tech giants and regulators and potentially change the digital landscape for years to come.
Yeah, let's take a moment to think about the human stories behind this legal battle. This isn't just a fight between big corporations. It's about real people whose lives are being affected by these allegations.
Yeah. There are entrepreneurs whose startups have struggled to compete with Google.
Mm,
There are consumers who feel like Google has violated their privacy with its data practices.
right.
And there are employees within Google who are struggling with the ethical implications of their company's actions.
This case reminds us that beyond the legal stuff and the financial numbers, there are real human stakes involved.
Yeah, it raises some important questions about the role of technology in our lives and the responsibility of these tech giants to operate ethically.
Absolutely. Now, as we continue this deep dive, let's think about the potential outcomes. There are a few possible scenarios, each with its own implications.
Uh-huh.
One possibility is that the court decides in favor of the plaintiffs, finding Google guilty of breaking antitrust laws.
Right.
This could mean big financial penalties, possibly billions of dollars, and orders for Google to change its business practices.
Hmm.
It could also lead to more lawsuits and regulatory scrutiny, putting Google under a microscope for years to come.
Another possibility is that the court sides with Google and dismisses the plaintiff's claims.
Right.
That would be a huge win for Google. They could continue their current practices without major changes.
But it might not be the end of the story. The plaintiffs could appeal and regulators could still do their own investigations.
A third possibility is that the case is settled out of court through a negotiated agreement.
Right.
This could involve Google agreeing to a financial payout, making changes to their business practices, or both.
Right. A settlement would resolve things faster and avoid the cost and uncertainty of a trial.
Right.
But it might not address all the concerns that have been raised, and some people might feel like justice wasn't fully served.
Each of these scenarios has different implications for Google, the digital ad market, and the tech industry as a whole.
Right. The final outcome is still up in the air. The trial is still going on, and it's hard to say how the judge will rule.
But this case is definitely a pivotal moment. It's a point where the power of these tech giants is being challenged and the rules of the digital economy are being rewritten.
Right. The outcome of this case will have lasting effects. Now let's just take a moment to appreciate how complex this case is.
Right.
It's this tangled web of legal arguments, technical jargon, and economic theories.
This case really requires a deep understanding of the digital advertising world, online auctions, how competition works, and the role of data in the digital economy.
It's pushing the boundaries of antitrust law as courts and regulators trying to figure out how to deal with companies like Google.
And it's a case that's still developing with new stuff coming out as the trial goes on.
It's a fascinating and challenging case to follow, but it's also a crucial one. The outcome could have a big impact on our digital lives.
Absolutely. Right. Let's distill some key takeaways from our deep dive today.
Okay.
First, this case highlights the immense power Google has in the digital ad market.
Right.
Their control over the infrastructure gives them a lot of influence over how ads are bought and sold, who gets paid, and how much.
The plaintiffs are saying that Google has abused this power, doing things that are anti-competitive and that have hurt both publishers and advertisers.
Second, this case raises some serious questions about how transparent and fair the digital ad market really is.
Mm-hmm.
The plaintiffs are alleging that Google's auction system is opaque. It's hard for publishers and advertisers to understand how prices are set and if they're being treated fairly. They're arguing that Google needs to be more open, giving publishers and advertisers more control and insight into the process. Third, this case underscores how important data is in the digital economy.
Right.
The plaintiffs are claiming that Google used its huge collection of user data to give its own ad buying tools an unfair advantage.
Right.
They're saying this raises concerns about data privacy and whether we need stricter rules to protect how our personal information is used. Fourth, this case highlights the growing scrutiny that tech giants like Google are facing from regulators and governments all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Concerns about antitrust are growing as policymakers try to grapple with the power of these companies and their impact on competition and innovation. This case could be a real turning point, leading to more forceful enforcement and stricter limits on how these tech giants do business. And finally, this case really shows how technology isn't neutral. The way it's designed and used has a huge impact on our lives, the economy, and society as a whole.
It's up to us to make sure technology is used fairly, promotes competition, and benefits everyone. This case is a real wake-up call. We often take these technologies for granted, but this lawsuit reminds us that there are real-world consequences to how they're designed and controlled.
This case makes us think critically about the digital world and the power dynamics at play. It's easy to get caught up in the legal and economic arguments, but there's also an important ethical dimension to consider.
That's a key point. Even if Google's actions are eventually deemed legal, does that automatically make them ethical? Legality and ethics aren't always the same thing.
Exactly. A company can operate within the law while still doing things that a lot of people would consider morally questionable.
Right.
And this case brings up some really tough ethical questions.
Like, for instance, how much control should one company have over information and advertising in our society? Is it okay for a company to use its dominance in one market to get ahead in another? And what about using personal data to target ads? Where do we draw the line between personalization and privacy?
These are questions that go beyond this particular lawsuit. They're questions we need to think about as a society as technology keeps changing and shaping our world.
This case reminds us that we can't just passively accept the technologies we're given. We have to think critically, ask tough questions, and demand that these technologies reflect our values.
So what does this all mean for you? The next time you see an ad online, think about the complex system that put it there. Think about the motivations, the data being used, and the potential consequences. Don't just be a passive consumer of technology, be an informed and engaged citizen of the digital world.
The outcome of this case could have ripple effects that impact us all. Stay informed, stay engaged, and make your voice heard. The future of the digital world is being shaped right now.
That concludes our deep dive into Google's trouble in Adland. We covered a lot today, but this is really just the beginning. This case will probably have a lot more twists and turns. We'll keep you updated on the latest developments and continue to explore the impact of this really significant case.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep questioning and stay curious.